Hey everybody, welcome back. Good to see you. I'm Keith Wallace. This is Alana Zerbe. You're listening to After Wine School, and today we're talking about corks and enclosures and everything else. So just like my mama used to say, what's the most important thing? What's on the inside or what's on top? Alana?
I never met your mom, and I'm glad.
Absolutely, folks. Yes. It doesn't matter if it's a cork or if it's a screw top. That's the question we're going to answer today.
In this episode, we are going to give you a nice short history of the cork and also the rise of cork alternatives and some practical advice so that you have good takeaways to make informed decisions about wine buying.
Absolutely. All right. Before we go any further, everyone should probably know what cork is and what it isn't. Okay. So cork is actually the interior of bark, actually. So there's a specific kind of oak tree. It's called the cork tree. That interior, it's very spongy. And which is very unique, right? Because it has a lot of holes inside of it. So when you press it, you can compress it really, really tight and then it'll bounce back. Compress really tight, bounce back. So yeah, like this worked really well, and it's waterproof too. So it does a lot of good stuff. That's what cork is. So you actually peel it off the tree and then it'll regrow. So you'll see cork forests that are being managed, like they'll have large cuts through their bark, but then they just grow it back. It does take a long time. We're talking a good decade plus to actually regrow. So you do need to have very large forests of cork trees to do this.
Yeah, and so cork has always been a very valuable resource. And in fact, in the 1660s, this is one of my favorite little factoids. It was actually a scientist, Robert Hooke, was looking at cork underneath a microscope. And he noticed what looked like bands of monk cells or maybe penitentiary cells. And he called these cells the building blocks of life. And so it was actually a piece of cork that he was looking at, which I think is just so cool. But around the same time, also glass started to be blown that was heavy enough and permeable enough to serve as long-term containers for storage and transport of wine and other beverages. And so it was really this marriage, this combination of glass bottles with cork that for the first time you could age wine for a long period of time. So this just changed wine practices worldwide.
Absolutely. Now, the problem now is that cork is a natural compound, right? It's a natural ingredient. And when you actually are growing cork, it has to be sanitized. And so what they used, these cork producers, they would spray it with basically bleach, which makes sense. It kills all the bacteria. But here's the problem. And this is something that every winery knows. You don't use any oxidative cleaning products in a winery because they will actually create that oxygen part of that compound will actually create chemical reactions throughout. And you have no idea what's going to happen. Now, that oxygen can create a lot of chemical reactions. And there's ones we weren't expecting. So everyone's had this. If you've been drinking wine for any length of period, you may have had this happen to you. You open a bottle of wine, you pour it, you smell it, and you're like, why do I smell wet cardboard? Why do I smell just like flooded basement? And then you try it, and you're like, why doesn't it taste like anything? This is disgusting. But if you've ever had that happen to you, what you had is a corked wine. And what that means is the sanitization process they used, which introduced some oxygen compounds, and they create what's called TCA. And this specific compound is just pernicious. You just need the tiniest bit, only like 1 part per million. And you end up having just like that smell of just disgusting nothingness, which is, maybe what hell would be like, or maybe in between heaven and hell that the Catholics like. Purgatory. Yes, this is what purgatory smells like.
Well, and let me say, wine that is bad, you cannot smell or detect anything from the cork.
The cork itself, no, exactly. Nope, it's just the tiniest bit of oxidative cleaning material that just remained on the cork. It became such a problem in the 90s and the early aughts, and all the way up to like around 2010, was that if you buy a case of wine, one of them is going to actually be corked. One of them is going to be infected. And that's a huge amount, especially when you're like buying for a wine school. Like that's huge. Like that means that I might have like 7% of my product bad, which meant I always had to have double the amount of wine for any class because there's a very good chance that a bottle is going to be corked. Now, what we also found is that certain qualities of cork were actually much more prone to TCA infection, especially ones that were like a bunch of different pieces of cork just glued together. So actually, I had to completely change how I was buying wines, largely due to that, because it was such a huge problem.
But also from the winery perspective, they also have the risk of TCA infection running rampant through the winery itself.
Oh, absolutely.
I just want to highlight that
Oh,
it's
yes.
incredibly insidious and can contaminate an entire winery.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's rules actually in wineries, and also at like in our wine cellaring program, wherever you're holding wine, you cannot have cardboard because cardboard also has some of these. Because oftentimes, especially the
that's
bleach ones,
interesting.
yeah, some of the glues in there, like they have compounds that can initiate
I
TCA.
never thought about that you don't see cardboard
Yeah.
boxes
They-
where wine is being made. And
Yeah,
stored.
exactly. Right.
Oh,
Only once they're actually
it's
everything's
bottled,
packaged, and that's why
yeah.
you see warehousing in a different place than your wine production.
Oh, that's interesting.
At the wine school, we use plastic containers for everything, move everything around rather than cardboard. Because of that, every time we have a wine delivery, they get all broken down and they get far, far away from our storage facility. But yeah, because TCA infections can actually spread. They can spread through even someone's wine storage facility. If you have one at home, like you can have this happen. So that's why you just don't want to have cardboard anywhere near it. Now, there have been a lot of reforms because it was such a bad problem that there have been significant reforms since like the early 2010s, and you can get a failure rate of around 3%. And the higher grade corks they have, then the less likely it is. So now it's still a problem, but it's just not nearly the level that it was, largely due to the fact they stopped using things like certain pesticides, bleach, which is a no-brainer. So modern corks, they're coming in multiple different grades. And so you have ones that are guaranteed to have no cork taint, but then those are incredibly expensive. And let's
Yes.
just point out that what we're talking about here, having the perfect enclosure might cost you an extra $3 a bottle because as a winery, we may have to spend over $1 per cork for things like grade 1 corks. And they go down to grade 3 corks, they're still fine, but you get much more failure rates.
So it's come a long way, but in the interim, for the
Yeah.
decades and decades
Yeah.
when the enclosure was ruining the wine, we actually had brilliant, inventive, wonderful Australian winemakers brainstorming an alternative. And so I didn't realize it went this far back. Beginning in the 1960s,
Yes, it did.
Yalumba Winery started interfacing with a French company to come up with a alternative to cork. So the resource that I know most is George Tabor's great book, To Cork or Not to Cork. So
Yeah.
George Tabor, well known for being the sole journalist at the Judgment of Paris and writing the definitive book on the Judgment of Paris. We've mentioned him before on this podcast, but he talks about how the Australians were just so fed up with having their wines ruined that they decided to come up with a completely different enclosure. And so they worked with a company called Delvin, and they came up with the screw cap for their wine. And so this is known in wine parlance as the Delvin enclosure. So if you want to avoid any negative connotations, don't say screw cap, say Delvin enclosure. And the Australians found that this eradicates completely TCA infection because you have a completely anaerobic environment for your wine. So today, most Australian wine and New Zealand wine is bottled under screw cap. They have long been studying the issue, and Keith is going to talk about this a little bit later. Some of the science has changed, but they were able to show that yes, wines under screw cap can age. So they've been the innovators and the trailblazers in this area.
Yeah, but the truth is that the cork, everyone loves the cork. Everyone does.
Everyone
Let me
loves the
tell you,
cork.
if you're out at a restaurant, you order that wine and it comes up, and especially if you're on a date, you're trying to impress somebody, and they show the wine and you see it, you're like, oh shit, it's a screw top.
Yeah.
Because everyone is going to look at that and they're like, oh, you cheap shit. Because when the sommelier just cracks it open,
Yeah.
but it's just not the same thing. You don't have the pulling of the cork, the laying of the cork down, which, by the way, people, you're just supposed to look at to make sure that The name on the cork is the same name on the label.
And
So
touch it to make
yeah,
sure
oh yeah,
it's
make
wet.
absolutely and touch. That's true. Absolutely, make sure it's stored properly, and that's it. I mean, I do love Delvin enclosures. I love them, despite it actually being so much better from a production standpoint. You don't have the market demand because if you're moving to Delvin enclosure, you're going to get hit with sales, especially restaurant sales. And it's also hard with direct to consumer. Places like Australia, New Zealand, they went wholesale. It wasn't just one winery, it was everybody. Everyone moved as a unit to screw tops. So that made it easy for individual wineries to make that move. Whereas everywhere else, especially in the United States, that's not the case.
But because there's such consumer rejection and backlash against the screw cap,
Yeah.
there have been alternatives to the alternatives. Everybody has seen the synthetic corks.
Evil.
Evil, they're terrible. I mean, they just have a plasticky Band-Aid smell. But there have also been things like the glass enclosures, the Vino Lock. Now, those are fancy.
Those are sexy.
Those are great. I
Once in a
love
while, I'll see those.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I'll
ooh, a rare
save
sighting.
them,
I'm like,
right.
pop. Yeah.
There's something called the helix, which has kind of a helix imprint in the cork, which is an alternative to screw cap. You can screw it out, but you still have the cork tape
exactly.
problem.
I know it's a cork screw cap, and it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's super expensive.
Yeah. There's something called the Zorf, which is like a pop off.
That is the funniest thing.
It's so weird.
Oh, they're so
It's
tacky,
so tacky,
looking.
really tacky looking.
You can't use those and be considered serious.
And then also just using the crown cap, which is something that, you use in sparkling wine production, and you'll see it on pet nats. I personally love a crown cap.
Yeah.
Because I hate foil. So I like anything that avoids foil. But crown caps still have an association of lower tier
Oh,
wine.
yeah. But things age well under Delvin. It's the perfectly engineered enclosure, right? It's standardized to the point, actually, that I can dial in whatever kind of style I want. I can use a specific cork. And the beautiful thing about it is that we're on like the 10th generation of Delvin enclosures. And the problem was oxygen transfer. Oxygen transfer is good and bad. There's times you don't want oxygen at all, but you kind of want some in other periods. For instance, if I actually make a wine and put a screw top on it, there's never oxygen coming in there again, right? If it's not permeable, nothing. And that can be a problem because what you can get is reductiveness. Lack of oxygen will mean that you might end up getting like a cabbage or like a burnt match smell, or even like dead animal. But now that we're on so many different generations of screw tops, they now actually have some permeability of oxygen. So if I have a red wine and I want it to age with a Delvin enclosure on, I can actually buy ones that will allow up to 0.5 grams per liter of oxygen over a year. So a tiny micro-oxidative quality. I can go all the way down to 0.1 if I want, or 0. So if I had a white wine that didn't want any oxygen transfer, then I can have it 0, all the way up to 0.5. So I could do that and just have this tight control over it so that there's some interplay, because that oxygen we found is necessary for aging red wines. I mean, how we want them to age. Do we want this big, bold red wine that slowly evolves over 10 years? Or do you want something that's big and round and plush that will evolve over the next 3-4 years? So we can really dial that in now with the choice of which type of enclosure.
Right. So with white wines, like aromatic white wines, a Riesling, you don't need a lot of permeability.
Almost none.
Right. Because you want to avoid browning. And so a screw cap is actually perfect for a
Yeah.
lot of German style white wines.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the great things when you're doing this, because you can dial in so close, that you need almost no SO2. So you can actually make biodynamic or natural wines or even organic wines without any use of SO2, but you have to have that control of the oxygen.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 So let's go into sustainability.
Woohoo!
So let's talk about the thing that brings a lot of ire out in some people. I had a run-in recently. It was so weird.
Oh, you told me about
It
this.
was so weird. In a Wine 101 class, I started talking about screw caps, as I do,
Yeah.
because it's a great story and people are genuinely curious about them. But somebody in class, as I was talking about how versatile and great screw caps are, started just getting really angry. Like, and the type of anger where I'm not going to ask, why are you getting so angry? Like, obviously, something I'm doing, something I'm saying is having a really bad effect on you. And I just want this class to be over and you to leave so I can talk about you to everybody, which I did.
It's understand, like, if you were talking about, like, how you hate puppies and you like going home and kicking puppies, that someone's getting angry in class, it's a wine class.
So I wrap it up. And I didn't ask him what that was about. But when people have strong feelings in this realm, it typically has to do with sustainability or protecting not just the romance of wine, but the way of life for small farmers.
Yes.
So my gut instinct is that he is of the opinion, and there are people who believe this, that screw caps and alternative enclosures are a threat to the cork farming business. And that this is something that, of course, is centuries upon centuries long, has lots of tradition, adds biodiversity in the Mediterranean. And so there's a lot of positives to it. And any threat to that industry is something to really rebel against. But the cork farmers themselves cannot produce enough corks to meet demand. So there's a need for alternatives anyway. So there's this misconception that you should stick to corks because of a sustainability argument. Alternatively, people who advocate for screw caps sometimes say, oh, well, that's better for the environment, because they're thinking that aluminum can be recycled. And that's just often not the case. So when it comes to sustainability, it's much murkier to actually measure. So I would just say that's the flashpoint. That's where people get really triggered on this argument. And there are pros and cons on each.
And it always has been a flashpoint, because every cork will always be sold. Like, every cork producer, if they can actually get corks to market, they're bought. So a lot of the wines in the world, if we wanted to cork every wine, we'd actually have to quadruple the amount of oak forest we have. And it would take about 50 to 100 years for those cork trees to actually come into production. So we are always at a limit of how much cork we have. But here's the problem. The economics of moving from cork to Delvin enclosures is incredibly expensive. You need a completely different bottling line. How you actually have to inject gas into them, how you actually inject the wine into it, all is a little bit different. And that's actually a mid-six-figure change. You also have to train everybody up on the systems. And then you also have to invest in all the product. Everything, every cork, every bottle doesn't work with Delvin enclosure. And so you're going to have to move all of your systems over, because you cannot have two different systems in one winery.
Well, some very high-end
wines do, but yeah, or you're very large, but you really can't if you're even a small to mid-size, because the space alone is too expensive. And also, one of the hardest things to do is keep these things maintained, largely because they break apart so much. There's so many moving pieces. I got one of my students into a winemaking position quickly, largely because he actually had experience in working with similar systems. So I got him a production job, largely because they
elevators. He knew how to fix elevators.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Which had from the same company, same Italian company, and they used a lot of the same systems.
So wild.
I know, it was crazy, but it worked.
But if you're buying wine, folks, especially everyday drinking wines, especially aromatic white wines, rest assured a screw cap is a perfect enclosure for that style of wine. And if you're buying wines that you're looking to cellar, or you expect that they might have long aging potential, go ahead and pull up that tech sheet. And if it's going to be a cork that is impervious to TCA, they will tell you on the tech sheet.
Yeah, if I'm aging wines, I want to know what the cork is, because if I don't see a perfect cork in there, if I don't see that they're using what I call grade 1 or grade 2 corks or a guaranteed cork, I'm not going to age it for any length of time at all. You can always tell what a winery thinks of their wine by the cork they use, though. So it's kind of interesting. If you open a wine and it's got that one of those composite corks, just basically looks like it's just like bits of cork glued together with a cap on it. That's the lowest, that's the cheapest kind of cork. And they're like, we're going to drink this in 6 months at most. Or you're going to pop this and drink this. You're not even going to notice that cork because this is just an everyday wine. The best corks, they're long. They almost have no openings in it at all. And they should look
they're uniform.
Uniform and seamless. No, those are great corks. And actually, if you're a home winemaker, you can choose really good corks, largely because other things are going to go wrong with the wines. I don't want the cork to be a part of that problem. So I actually spend more money on corks for my students than if I'm professionally making wines, because I'm usually making wines that are supposed to be consumed within 5 years. So yeah,
I love this issue.
yes,
I love this topic. I love it because it's about everything that wine's about. It's about history, culture, change, adaptation,
yes.
science versus consumer expectations and myths. And yeah, I absolutely love it. So thank you for indulging me in this
Well,
topic today.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I've thought far too much about cork than any reasonable person should. Do me a favor, do Alana a favor, like and subscribe. Great reviews always help, especially on Apple. They're surprisingly effective. But also, look, if you like what we talk about, if you like how we talk about wine, if you like the idea of wine not being for a certain kind of person, that is for everybody, if you want to actually excel, or maybe even think about it as a career, like we have it as our career, I recommend taking a small A course at the National Wine School, wineschool.us, the only certification body that's specifically designed for the American market and for American students. So that's what I recommend. I know you have other recommendations.
I do, folks. If you happen to be in the Philadelphia area, please do come by the Wine School of Philadelphia and meet us on our home turf for a class. And if you would like to watch a video of this episode, you can find us on YouTube. Our channel is Wine School USA.
Fantastic. And definitely when you come, definitely if Alana's a teacher, just like bring up her anti-cork bias. Bring it up, yell, scream, get really red.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Cheers.
Cheers.